If you've ever thought about solo cruising, you've probably heard that it costs double. Well, that's not entirely true, and it's not the whole story. After decades of cruising, I've uncovered several solo cruiser secrets that nobody's talking about. I'm Gary with Optimal Cruising, bringing you fresh cruise advice, money-saving hacks, and secret strategies the cruise lines don't advertise. Here are 11 things you need to know before you book that solo cabin. When I go on a cruise, I'm usually with my wife and sometimes other family and friends. And that's how most people cruise. And when you go cruising like this, you know you have to balance what you want to do. There's a lot of activities, shore excursions, things to do when you get at ports of call, and not everybody's on the same page. So there's planning that goes in, and there's a lot of give and take and compromise. Well, solo cruising is all about being selfish, but selfish in a good sort of way. It's all about setting your own schedule. Your entire cruise is all about you. My wife went on a solo cruise once and she came back saying that's the only way to cruise from now on. Of course she was joking, I think, but still it goes to show you that when you travel with other people, you are constantly compromising on what you're doing. And if you go by yourself, it's all about you. And a lot of people simply cruise by themselves because they don't have somebody to cruise with. Whether they have a partner that doesn't really like it, or their friends and family aren't always available when they want to go, so they end up going it alone. But when you do cruise alone, the finances work out a little differently. Sometimes my wife will go on a solo cruise as a real treat for her because she doesn't have to worry about me and what I want to do or what anybody else wants to do, and she can just do her own thing. And the last time she went on one, the cost was almost double. And here's why. When you go cruising as a solo person, you have to pay what they call the single supplement. And what this is you're basically paying twice for a double occupancy room because cruise lines assume that each room is going to have two people in it. And this is the case on most cruise ships with most cruise lines. But because solo cruising is becoming more popular, there are more and more ships that are being built with solo cabins, and that can save you some money. However, it's still going to be considerably more than the per person price if you go with a partner. Here's an example with Norwegian, which is one of the cruise lines leading the way in solo cruising cabins. Now, the standard double occupancy cabin here costs $900 per person. For the exact same cruise, you can book a solo cabin for $1,200. And that is an additional $300 as a supplement for traveling by yourself. If you're cruising alone, this can save you a lot of money over booking a double occupancy cabin. If you book a solo cabin, it's going to be a lot smaller than a double occupancy cabin, which are already small. And it's going to typically be in the interior, which means if you want a balcony, you're going to have to book that and pay double the price. But there is a silver lining to this extra cost that will save you some money. A friend of mine once told me he avoids cruising solo because he doesn't want to pay double the cost. But there are some savings that come along with cruising solo. One is you don't have to pay double the gratuities or double the port fees and taxes. In fact, even if you book a standard room and you're paying double the occupancy price, you're only going to pay gratuities and taxes for one person. And then anything else that you add on, like a drink package where they usually require you to pay for both adults in the room, if you're a solo traveler, you only pay that once just for you. This is a secret a lot of people miss, which does save you money when you're traveling solo. And in addition to the financial savings, there's a loyalty benefit to traveling solo. When my wife cruises solo, she earns double the points with Royal Caribbean. And this is important to note. Some cruise lines will do this. So, for example, if you're cruising on a 7-night cruise with a partner, Royal Caribbean will give each of you 7 points towards your loyalty status for that cruise. However, if you're cruising solo and you booked a double occupancy room, you paid the single supplement, Royal Caribbean is going to give you double the points. So instead of 7, you earn 14 points, which will get you more rewards more quickly. It's just an extra advantage you get for cruising solo. And with a significant rise in the number of people cruising this way, cruise lines are making some adjustments. When I first started cruising, it was virtually impossible to find a solo cabin. Everybody had to pay that single supplement for the double occupancy rooms. But these days, it's becoming more and more possible. Norwegian Cruise Lines and Virgin both have a large number of solo cabins on many of their ships. And Norwegian is committed to building more. In fact, they've announced that on some of their newer ships, they're going to be solo cabins that have balconies. That's unheard of in the industry. Now, don't expect these to come at a cheap price, but they still should be cheaper than booking a double occupancy balcony cabin. And for a while now, NCL has been catering to the solo cruiser with a specific solo cruiser lounge that only you have access to if you book one of the solo cabins. So it's kind of a way for everybody who's there by themselves to get to know the other people on the ship and just have a place to go away from everybody else who's with a couple or with a group. And while these things are huge perks for the solo cruiser, there is some downside you should be aware of. Anybody who's been solo cruising will tell you that you stick out sometimes like a sore thumb. And that's not for everybody. You have to have the right personality for that to work for you. While there are more people cruising by themselves, it's still not what is typical. Most people are cruising with a partner, significant other, or other family and friends. And so when you get on board and you're all by yourself, be prepared to be asked over and over again by your room steward, by your wait staff, is it just you? Are you by yourself? Sometimes, and for a lot of people, that can kind of get on your nerves, but you have to put yourself in the position of these service personnel. They're used to their always being at least 2 and sometimes a lot more. And so when you show up by yourself, they're questioning it. And you'll probably get this repeatedly over the course of your cruise. One solo cruiser told me it never bothers him. He loves doing things by himself, and he always makes a point to go out to eat by himself once in a while, to go to a movie by himself, just to get away from everybody and just be in his own thoughts. And if that's you, you're not going to have any issue with this. In fact, you'll probably be happy to let them know, yes, I'm by myself today. Are you the type of person that likes to go out on your own once in a while? Or are you always more comfortable with somebody else? Let me know in the comments below. And this next tip, a lot of solo cruisers don't think about until they get on board. If you are single and live by yourself, then you have total responsibility for everything in your life. But a lot of solo cruisers actually have partners, they live with other people, and they're just going on a cruise by themselves. And this aspect doesn't hit you until you're on board and having to do everything by yourself. When my wife and I cruise together, we're constantly reminding each other. We're going out to the pool. Did you bring the sunscreen? We're getting off the ship at a port of call. Did you bring the passports? Did you bring your key card? All these things that kind of help us keep each other in check. But when you go by yourself, you don't have that. And if you're used to that in daily life, it can be an abrupt shock. If you're used to having that backup brain like I am, when you cruise by yourself, you have to think things through a little bit more thoroughly and make sure you're not doing something that's going to cost you later. If you don't live alone, but you're going on a cruise by yourself, the first couple of days are going to feel like absolute freedom. You can make all the decisions, do everything you want to do. You don't have to worry about anybody else. But by the time day 3 comes around, if you're used to being with somebody all the time, it kind of gets to feel a little bit lonely. And that's a real thing that happens to a lot of solo cruisers. It takes the right kind of personality to push through this. Some people are really used to being with another person, and after a couple days of being by themselves, they don't enjoy it anymore. They miss doing all those activities with their partner. And people often start to feel like they're having a great experience, but they're missing out on something because they're not sharing it with their partner. And then a lot of people cruise solo because they're actually single and they're looking to meet other people. If you've ever been on a cruise, you know once you get on board that first day, everybody's in a pretty good mood. You're going on a great vacation together. People are excited. But if you're on by yourself and you don't have somebody else to share that excitement with, you might be looking to meet some other people who are also traveling alone. But most likely, you're going to have to start those conversations. You're going to have to be the icebreaker. Most people are traveling with somebody, and they're not going to strike up a conversation with somebody who's by themselves. If you're an extrovert, this should be no problem, but if you're an introvert, it might pose some difficulty. However, cruise lines do have a lot of meetup groups for solo cruisers to make this a bit easier. Now, these groups are typically posted in the daily schedule, and you'll see more of them in the beginning of the cruise so that people can get familiar with who else is cruising solo on that ship. So if you need a little help finding some other companions who are traveling by themselves on your cruise, go to one of these meetups. They're usually informal, self-led, and it's a good way to just identify the other people on board who are cruising by themselves, and then maybe even later on you might see them somewhere and it'll be easier to start up a conversation because you already know that they're alone just like you. But since you are by yourself and you have nobody else to be accountable for, there are a couple safety tips you need to keep in mind. I'm going to tell you about those next, but first, take a minute and subscribe to our channel so that you get all of Optimal Cruising's updates. The nice thing about cruising with your partner or friends and family is that there's other people on board who know you're there, who are accountable for you, and you are checking in with each other constantly during the cruise. But if you're by yourself, you don't have anybody from day to day that knows where you are or where you should be should something happen. So it's always a good idea to have a digital check-in buddy back home. Somebody that knows your itinerary, where you're going, when the cruise ends, and that you agree to check in with maybe once a day just to let them know you're okay and what's going on. And so if you miss a check-in, they would be alerted. And then 2 pro tips. 1, it's never a good idea to announce loudly that you're traveling by yourself. If you go to one of the solo meetups, everybody there knows everybody's by themselves. And that's a good way to identify each other. But if you're in a public area where there's all kinds of people around, you don't want to make it known, especially if you're a woman, that you're on the ship without anybody else. And then it's always a good idea to use the ship's deadbolt on your cabin door, whether you're traveling solo or not. And then there's a few things that people who travel solo all the time tell me they do to make dining a lot more comfortable. My wife tells me the most awkward part about cruising solo is dining alone. And I get it. Everybody is with somebody and you're by yourself. Not to mention it, the minute you walk in there, you're being questioned by 1 or 2 different people. Is there anybody else? Is anybody joining you? So when you're on a cruise ship, there are a couple workarounds. One is, of course you can eat at the buffet, but you probably don't want to do that every night. In the buffet, you're going to be much less conspicuous. A lot of people are sitting at tables by themselves there. You probably won't be noticed. Or if you're eating at a bar restaurant, you're probably going to be less noticed. When you go to the main dining room, are you more of an extrovert? Are you looking to talk to and meet new people? If so, then ask for a shared table. That's going to be a way to get you with a lot of people you don't know, and you'll start some friendly conversations and have a nice dinner. Even though you're by yourself, you'll probably forget that you are. And if you just want to eat by yourself and you enjoy that, and I know many cruisers who do, bring something with you, like a book or a tablet, which kind of indicates to other people that you just want to be left alone, and you'll probably have a much better time. So, are you ready for your next solo cruise? Well, there are a lot of passengers getting denied boarding by the cruise lines these days. I'll tell you how to avoid that right here.